This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and today I have an author, the author of Lance by Chance, the story of Lance Von Erich, Vinny Barry, also known as Vincent Barry. How are you doing today, Vincent?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for having me on.
No problem. My subscribers might be a little bit familiar with this. We obviously have a lot of Texas fans on this channel, but Lance did do an interview with the two-man power trip of wrestling's John Paz to promote your book. And I did post the audio version of that on this channel, and I think about 7,000 people saw it. So there are some that are going to be familiar with the story.
Yeah, I saw that, and I saw that you did that, and someone shared that with me. I appreciate you doing that, and I think when people know a little more about the story, I think because honestly, I think when people hear the name of the title and they automatically think Lance Von Erich, he wasn't a real Von Erich. The story goes a lot deeper than Lance Von Erich himself, and of course, you can't tell a story about world class or the Von Erichs without touching on the tragedies. And that was the reason why they created Lance Von Erich, was because David passed away. And a lot of people think that they created him and brought him in because of Mike. They just put him on the fast track because of Mike got real sick. But they discovered him right after David died, and wasn't a wrestler at all. Didn't like wrestling at all, but he was a good-looking dude. He had a build like $1 million, and he was a bodybuilder and a weightlifter. And they just automatically thought, hey, we can pass him off as a Von Erich cousin, and we can, and it's funny is because I've seen a few of the Dark Side of the Rings, and every time on Dark Side of the Ring, they mention Lance briefly, but they really don't go into how much of a character this guy really was. I mean, they brought him in after, they discovered him after David Von Erich, and the ratings on the show really plummeted after Fritz went on TV and told everyone that he wasn't a real Von Erich. I don't think people really understand, was he the straw that broke the camel's back in world class? I don't think he was the straw, but it didn't help. That world class had already lost a vertebrae or two before Lance left, but it didn't help Fritz's credibility. And leaving the NWA didn't help world class at all either,
The one thing from the interview that Lance did that I posted on this channel that I found was an excellent point was if they had just not come out and said that he wasn't a real Von Erich, they wouldn't have really even known, because he didn't do much in wrestling after, and word didn't travel between the territories. So it was a huge mistake on Fritz's part by going on TV after telling everyone he was a Von Erich and saying that he wasn't.
I'll say this, Devin, he didn't do much in wrestling over here in the States, but he had a 10-year wrestling career. He wrestled with world class for a year and a half, and then when he left, he did a short stint with Ken Mantell's Wild Wild West, and he did a short stint, one trip to Puerto Rico. He then went to South Africa and wrestled for Steve Simpson's family. And he wrestled there probably until 1996. And became, and I know a lot of people, I've had this conversation with a lot of people, and he became a pretty big international star over there using the Von Erich name as Lance Von Erich.
So he did keep using the name then over there.
He did. Absolutely.
So how did they convince him to become a Von Erich in the first place? if you're saying that he had no interest in wrestling, obviously he was a great athlete, very good looking guy. How did they discover him, and how did they go about coming up with this plan and presenting it to him?
Well, David Manning was at a golf course, and Lance was at a golf course with his fiance and his, I guess, soon to be father-in-law. And they were golfing. And the fiance just said, "Hey, I think this guy is staring at you. Or, do you know this guy? Because he's looking at you quite often today, and maybe he thinks he knows you." And finally, I guess Lance caught the guy looking at him, and it was David Manning. And so David Manning came over and introduced himself. And the only convincing that David had to say to Lance, who was, I guess, 23 or 24 at the time, "I think you can make a lot of money." And a guy in his early 20s, who liked to make money anyway, thought that sounded pretty good to him. But he never made the money that was, what he thought that he was going to make. I mean, a lot of times he was, making gas and whatever. I mean, not that he didn't get good paydays here and there. His very first payday in world class was like $2,500. And that was when he went down there to the Cotton Bowl and did that little run in with Gino and Chris when they were getting their heads shaved, but that was his very first appearance in world class too. And I would think that, Fritz wanted to make a good impression on him, but the money in wrestling for him wasn't that good. But also too, you got to remember, world class was on the downcline or the decline down by the time Lance came in. It really got worse when Gino Hernandez died. And I think they talked about that on Dark Side of the Ring. Of course, they talked about Mike Von Erich. That was the one for me. When Mike Von Erich died, that really kind of took the wind out of my sail. And that was on Dark Side of the Ring as well. And yeah, it was a tragic time, and it was a great territory. At one time, that place was magical.
Yeah, not too long before that, it was magical. Did they kayfabe the other wrestlers that he wasn't really a Von Erich?
I'm sure the guys, I'm sure the guys knew he wasn't. I'm sure the guys knew he wasn't a Von Erich, but I asked him about that because, when we talked about that, he said if the guys, because he was getting a push, he got an automatic rocket put on his back, right, when he came down there, because he's, bearing the Von Erich name. And so we had talked. I said, well, did any of the guys in the promotion give you, did you feel any friction from any of the guys because you were getting a push and some of those guys before you? Because he says clearly, he just says, hey, he said it in Portland and he said it in Dallas, here I come in and there's guys that have been waiting and waiting, for their turn. They've been waiting to wrestle for the American title, and Lance got a shot at the American title the first Christmas after the October that he came to town, so he knew he was getting a push. But he, I would pretty much know that the guys knew he wasn't, right? I would think that, because the guys in the business are smart anyway, but he didn't get have an issue with any of the guys. He said if the guys did have an issue with him, he didn't know about it.
Right. And if he was Fritz's boy and getting the push, I'm sure they didn't want to mess with someone that they knew Fritz wanted to get over.
Right.
Matt R. wants to know if he spent much time with the Von Erichs outside of the world-class events.
He, the one Von Erich that he spent the most time with was Kerry. And him and Kerry got along quite well, and him and Kerry, their wives, the four of them would get together for dinner or drinks. There wasn't a lot of downtime, but when they did, the four of them liked to hang out and spend some time together. But he didn't have a relationship with any other. He never rode with Kevin. He never rode with Mike. Kevin and him had a strictly business relationship. If you watch them on camera, they look like they got along really, really well, but they didn't hang out. There wasn't a relationship there. There wasn't a friendship there. And Mike was a little younger than Lance, and he was really, really quiet. He had this personality. He's real quiet, and he basically, the way that Lance describes it is that he come to his matches to wrestle, and that was about it. And so he didn't see a lot of Mike. But Kerry was the one that he got along well with and liked a lot.
Kevin has been the most outspoken, not that the others are still around to talk about it, but Kevin talks as if he was against it the entire time, bringing Lance in and saying he was a Von Erich cousin, I guess. Did Lance realize that Kevin felt this way at the time?
Yeah, I believe so. Absolutely. He could feel it right off the bat, that he wasn't real happy with, with him coming in and using the name. He could feel it. He could see it. He wasn't real chummy with him, when he was first training down there at the Sportatorium, Kevin and Kerry would come in together like on a Friday, and he'd Lance would think that they were coming to get their checks or something because they weren't there very long. But Kerry would come down to the ring and encourage them, and hey, you're looking good and you're doing good and glad you're here. And if you ever met Kerry, he was that kind of a guy, right? But Kevin was a little more like his father, and he didn't treat Lance like that, warm and chummy.
As far as the infamous drug and party scene in World Class in those days, did Lance stay out of that, or was he involved in that? You don't hear the stories like some of the other Von Erichs that were intoxicated, I guess, a couple times when they went out there to wrestle. You don't hear that as much with Lance.
Well, he talks about that in the book for sure. And yeah, he got into that scene. He talks about, there's a story in there about something that happens. I don't mind talking about the book and sharing the book, but I do want people to read the book. But he does talk about how drugs did get him in trouble. They got him, and he did he could get into the medical, the meds, the pain meds pretty good, because, the very first time that he got hurt, they sent him to a doctor, and he explains this in the book that he could get anything he wanted, Demerol, Seconal, Tuinol, Placidil, whatever. And the guy was doing that for all the wrestlers, and so, and that was a doctor that, the Von Erich sent him to. So, if he's getting that, everybody else is going there too. And there was a lot of drugs in that promotion at the time,
Yes, we've heard the story. There was also a lot of groupies, which I imagine he had his fair share of. He looks like he's still a bit of a playboy to this day from the pictures that I've seen.
Well, he showed up on one of these things in a purple robe one day. We were doing it for Australia, so it was an hour. I don't know what time it was. 7:00 over there. It was 6:30 where I was. It was 5:30 where he was, and he shows up in a purple robe. So yeah, I would Yeah, it was kind of stylish, He looked like a playboy to me. But yeah, I mean, he was a good looking dude, man. And the women liked him, and there's no doubt about that. He almost missed his flight to Israel the first time they went to Israel because of that. And so I think the book details a lot of stuff. The thing I like about the book is a lot of people thought he was going to bash the Von Erichs, and if he's hard on anybody in the book, it's him himself. He was, you know, um, honest to a fault, and I think a lot of people would be surprised of some of the things that he talks about in the book, about himself. And a lot of people have asked me, hey, did Dark Side of the Ring talk to this guy? And I said, well, they only mentioned him like for 1 minute. No, did they talk to him about what he did after he left World Class? So I think a lot of people are going to be surprised of some of the ways that he decided to make money. He went over there and became a businessman, but you got to remember, it's totalitarian government over there. There's a lot of corruption over there. And he found ways, and I'm not going to make him sound like a superhero or a Robin Hood. I mean, he was definitely lining his pockets with the money that he was making, but he really felt like he was doing a service over there and helping the citizens over there that were getting taxed out of their pockets.
It seems like he made money and like kind of lives like the dream lifestyle now. From what I see, like I've seen a recent picture of him with like 4 women on a beach, and it appears that like that's his life. So did he make his money from wrestling then?
He didn't make his money in wrestling.
Okay.
I mean, I guess he made a living, right? But when he was in South Africa, he had gyms, and he had workout facilities, and he did very well. He did very well with them. And the guy is I mean, he's just like a radar when it comes to ideas and making money, and I can do this and I can do that, and I've met some people in my life like that, but I've never met one like Lance. I mean, he's every time you talk to him, it's bottom line. It's like, well, it's going to cost this much to do that, and it's going to cost me, and if I do that, I'm going to need to do this, and I'm going to, and so he's always thinking about the bottom line. So he's done well for himself for over the years, but wrestling was, he didn't like it when he started, but I think after he left, what he liked about wrestling so much was that it took him places, and when he was over in South Africa, he got to go to India, and he got to go to Singapore, and he got to go to all these countries that he would have never gone to. And I think he liked that, anytime that he could go somewhere and wrestle, he would wrestle,
There's a fan on here, Jay Enmore, wants to know what happened with Lance in New Japan.
Okay, that's really good. So the story's in the book too, and he didn't. He was told by everybody in the business that everybody in the business would tell him, "Hey, if you want to make money, you need to go to Japan about 3 times a year. If you could go 3 or 4 times a year, you'll do well." Kelly Kaninsky told him that. Several people told him that. And so I guess it was in October of '86, he had an opportunity to go to Japan. Well, he got there and he signed a contract for $10,000. So he was like, wow, this is what these guys are talking about, because it was like I think a 2-week stay that he was supposed to stay. So he got over there, and he didn't adapt to the culture very well, and so he drank, and because he drank, and they didn't have any beer over there. He was drinking scotch, and he got a little way too much drunk for his first event. And so, again, Kevin's reaction is in there, and he did not finish the tour. And Kevin to this day, because I've heard him like 2 times after the book came out, Kevin's like, hey, we had honor over there, and he went over there and he disgraced our name and all this. Look, honor in Japan and wrestling names and honor and all that means absolutely nothing to Lance. You might as well ask him if he wanted a burger from Wendy's or McDonald's, because the guy has no clue when it comes to what it means to wrestle in Japan. He doesn't care. But a Von Erich knows what that means, a real Von Erich. Bruiser Brody would know what it means to wrestle and honor your commitments in Japan. But Lance, he's just there to get a paycheck, And so that's Kevin's biggest complaint, is that he left Japan. And he says that, and again, you could read the book to get more information on this, but he says that he got that Fritz took him out of the hospital to send him to Japan. And I spoke to somebody who worked in the office during that time, and nobody replaced. So Kevin says that Fritz took him out of the hospital and sent him to Japan to relieve Lance. And from who I talked to, who worked in the office and was doing the booking, like the traveling and stuff like that, nobody replaced him. He might have gone at a later time, but he didn't go that week.
This is a joke question here from Johnny Brasco. Was Lance in the Von Erich will?
I would say no.
I'm going to guess Kevin probably inherited whatever Fritz had.
Yeah, I would. Well, he sold the tape library to Vince, right? It went on the demand. So, I mean, I don't know what the numbers were on that, but I'm sure that was a pretty penny.
Sean Wood wants to know if there's any Lance Von Erich Sportatorium stories you could share with us.
Let's see. Well, Lance had some friends. So when he went to Israel, he made friends over there the first time. So, and some very, very good friends. And they had came down before he left Dallas. They came to visit him in Dallas. And when they showed up to the Sportatorium, they were very surprised of the condition of the building. And I've been in the building. There's pipes in the in the ceiling on the ceiling of the hallways and stuff, and water's dripping, and there's puddles of water, and it smells like popcorn, and it's not that attractive. And their reply to Lance was, or their question was, this is the world famous Sportatorium that we watch on TV, because all they show on TV is the ring, and you see all the people, and you really don't see all of the building, and so that was one thing that his friends were pretty surprised about. He talks about how, like, in the dressing room, where there was like one dressing room, but on the outside there was a door for the heels and a door for the baby faces. But when and only the baby faces went in that door, and only the heels went in the heel door. But when you get in there, it's just one big room and everybody's together. But it appears, so that was one thing he shared that he thought was unique,
This is a good question from Ace Goodhart. Was there ever any talk about having Lance feud with the Von Erichs and doing a storyline about him being the imposter, Von Erich, because that could have really blown up.
No, there was no talk after Fritz went on TV, and after, here's what we think, and Lance has talked to me about this several times, is, there was, everyone's, says that, well, it was, Lance wasn't, it was about money, and Lance wasn't happy with the money he was making, but that they never really had that conversation. Lance was working a lot, and he was, the Von Erichs, again, on Dark Side of the Ring, Kevin was really good about saying, oh, we couldn't miss a match, and Von Erichs can't miss a match. And, Lance was wrestling twice a night because the Von Erichs never missed a match. They missed a lot of matches, and a lot of people in Texas know that they did. And it was just a common thing, and I don't know if it was because of, they thought that, oh, my dad, it's my dad's company and I can get away with it. But, when Lance was wrestling Ric Flair, again, this story's in the book, but he says, hey, get ready to work. And he said that because he knew who the Von Erichs were. And so the writing was on the wall, the warnings were everywhere. And so what happened was, he's working 2 times a night and he gets an injury, and he just doesn't go to work. He doesn't call, they don't call him. He just doesn't show up to work. He wanted his shoulder to heal. And then by that time, Fritz came out on TV and outed him. And so there was no talks about a feud. And I know that somebody asked me, there was some kind of an angle or something that Iceman was wrestling Kerry or something like that, and the lights went out, and Lance was supposed to turn off the lights, and he was even on the program, because somebody showed me the program. Lance wasn't even in the country. So, there was no Lance angle after, that Lance was a part of, or that he knew of.
Your buddy Bryce Boudreau is checking in and says that your book, Lance by Chance, is a fantastic read. And I've put the link up a few times in this, but the link is also in the description for anyone that wants to pick it up. Dusan, watching from Norway, wants to know if Lance ever ribbed anyone or got ribbed.
He did rib. He ribbed Kerry. Again, that story's the story's in the book, but yeah, he ribbed Kerry, and he said that he said that stuff in Portland was a little more frequent than it was in Dallas. Not that it didn't go on in Dallas, but when he was in Portland, he was like, it was happening left and right. Bobby Jaggers was always doing something. Billy Jack Haynes was always doing something. And, sometimes he thought he was running around with some kids, because it was just a lot of laughing and trying to get a one up on everybody. He said that, again, that's part of the business, right? The jokes and the ribs and stuff like that. But he told me if he was to compare the two territories, that Portland was worse than Dallas in that sense of behavior.
They were too busy with all the groupies in Dallas.
Yeah, and they were too high too, probably.
Speaking of Portland, Al wants to know if Lance was friendly with Matt Bourne.
He did not meet Matt Bourne until he went to World Class, but yes, he was. And he liked Matt Bourne, and he liked Buzz Sawyer too. And so Matt Bourne and Buzz Sawyer and Lance and the Dingo Warrior, who's Jim Hellwig, who was the Ultimate Warrior, had a program, and they traded the belts back and forth for a little bit, the tag team belt. So, yeah, he liked Matt, and he liked wrestling, and Matt, and the thing he liked about Matt was that he was a second generation wrestler, and he talks about that often of how those wrestlers were just a little bit better or different, like the Von Erich boys and Kelly Kaninsky and Matt Bourne and Steve Simpson and all these guys that were second generational wrestlers. He was just like, the other guys, some of the other guys were good, but those guys, it was like a night off because they knew what they were doing. But you got to remember, these are guys that were wrestling with their dad in the backyard, all those guys, I'm sure, So when your dad's Gene Kaninsky or Fritz Von Erich, it's like, that's probably all you're doing is wrestling.
Yeah, it's in your blood in those days. But sometimes the second generation just don't come close more often than not to the first generation. But Kerry definitely came close, and David too, to Fritz's success, I would say.
Yeah, and not taking anything away from Kevin. I think Kevin was an outstanding wrestler. They were all different. They all had their different styles. It's so funny is you've got four young men. I didn't see Chris perform on TV, and he wasn't. By the time I stopped watching wrestling, I was, I was, I was just out of the wrestling scene by the time Chris came on the scene. So I really can't, talk about his personality because I didn't know him very well. But when you take, Mike, Kevin, Kerry, and David, I mean, golly, man, they all had different styles. Kevin used the ropes, they all could cut pretty decent promos, except Mike. He didn't cut a lot of, I didn't think he, but I liked Mike. I mean, I thought Mike was a good upstanding guy, and but everyone talks about how he didn't want to wrestle, But I thought Kevin was good. I thought Kerry, of course I liked Kerry a lot, but David was, I mean, when I got the news, I was about 15 years old. I got the news that David died. I couldn't believe it, man. I called the radio station and asked, and they told me, and I sat there and cried on the payphone, and all those tragedies were, they hit everyone. I mean, you didn't have to be a wrestling fan to be sad that the Von Erichs died, and my parents weren't into wrestling, but they knew it because of me, and I would hear my parents quite often say things like, well, it was pretty sad that a parent lost all these kids, and everyone talked about it in town, and it was sad, and that was one of the things too. It was like when I wrote this book was how do you how do you tell this story, because I wanted it to be in good taste, but you really can't tell this story without sharing the tragedies, right? Because especially if you know the dynamics of the story. I mean, if David Von Erich didn't die, there's probably never a Lance Von Erich. So it's kind of hard not to touch that stuff, And there was other stuff going on in there too. I listened to your podcast the other day with the boys and Jerry Bostic, and he was asking a question, or someone asked the question about the super kick in the hotel in Israel. It's in there. It's in the book. They were talking about Chris Adams getting drunk on the plane. It's in the book. Lance was there, and I talked to David Manning. David Manning gave me a lot of really good information on this, and he wrote the foreword to the book. I reached out to Kevin, and Kevin wrote a paragraph, and it's in the front of the book. And at first, he didn't want. I text him. And I'll tell you a funny story. Devin, do you know who Kenny Casanova is?
He's an author. Yeah, he wrote Kamala's book, I think, and a couple others.
Sure. Yeah, and yeah, Bruce Beefcake, Sabu. and he's my mentor. And so he's been helping me. And when I was writing this book, one night he saw me on the messenger, and he just sent me a message and, hey, how's the book coming? Where are you at? Do you have this done yet? Or did you send me this or that? Whatever. And we're talking, and somewhere in the conversation, he just randomly, and he does this quite often, but he'll just randomly go in another direction. And he said, hey, how big are your nuts? And of course, any guy is going to say, oh, they're huge, right? Well, I was like, yeah, they're huge. So he sends this number, and he says, hey, call this number. It belongs to Kevin Von Erich, you know? And so I had that number, and I knew I had to call him. But at the time that I got the number, I didn't know what to say to him. And the book was really not quite ready. And so I guess May or June of 2020, I reached out to him and called him like, I think 2 Fridays in a row. And one day he just texted me out of the blue, and we texted each other for about 2 hours. And I remember doing this because I went over to my sister-in-law's house, and I sat in the front of her yard. I was texting this dude in my car, and we talked for about 2 hours, and he's just texting me back and forth. And he said, "Nay, you know what? I don't want to write anything for the book. I think it wouldn't be fair to my brothers." And he mentioned the thing about Japan, and he was really pissed off about that. And and then he would. I could tell there was animosity there, and he wasn't, and so he just said, Vinny, no, thank you for the offer, because I told him, you can write whatever you want, man. I don't care how long it is. I'll stick it in there, and about a week later, he texted me back and said, hey, I was thinking a lot about this, and I didn't realize, how much I've thought about this over the years, and didn't really say much. And he was just really cordial and said, hey, I hope you're doing good. I hope Lance is doing good. And you guys take care of yourself. And I was like, okay. So about a week before I went to printing, it was a Friday night, and I was calling the printer on Monday, or send my stuff up on Monday. And so I just sent him a text and said, hey, would you give me a quote that I could stick on the back of the book? And he printed out like this paragraph. He sent me this paragraph in a text and put his name to it and everything. He says, you can use that. And it was too big to put on the back of the book, so I stuck it. It's the first thing you read in the book, and it's not that flattering. And when I went to Lance and told him about the paragraph, and he says, well, are you going to stick it in there? And I said, yeah, I'm going to stick it in there. And he goes, well, I don't see why you have to stick it in there. And I go, Lance, we have to put it in there because it's Kevin's piece. It's Kevin's say, and it's not very nice, and it's not very flattering, but you know what? We need to stick it in the book. And his reply was, well, if you think we need to stick it in the book, then stick it in the book. And that's why it's in the book.
Very interesting. Now, Herb Simmons, who's involved with this big Bruiser Brody Cup event in Carthage, Texas, November 5th and 6th, which will be the biggest fan fest in Texas of the year. He wants to know if Lance had any interactions with Brody and what he thought about Bruiser Brody.
He did. He wrestled in about 10 matches with Bruiser Brody. He liked Bruiser Brody. He thought Bruiser Brody was a good family man. The way he carried himself at the Sportatorium and at the matches. He didn't go out and party with the guys. He didn't womanize. He came to work. He did an exercise regimen. He would tell things to Lance. He'd share things with Lance, and this isn't the book, but he'd share things with Lance and, hey, watch out for this, or don't do this. And there's a common piece of advice that several people give him in the book. Well, there's a couple common pieces of advice, but it's real interesting that, that it's like everybody saw the writing on the wall. And whether Lance saw the writing on the wall or not, he was going to ride the horse until it died. And it died in 1987, right before the third Parade of Champions. This will put some things in perspective for you for the way that the promotion was, how hot it was, and how quickly it wasn't. So in 1984, you could go to the Wikipedia and see this, but they had like 43,000 paid tickets. They might have had 50,000 people in that Texas Stadium when Kerry won the world title. That was the first Parade of Champions in 1984. Fast forward to the third Parade of Champions 2 weeks after Mike Von Erich died, and there was maybe 6,000 or 7,000 people at that. So you're talking about, I don't know what the numbers on that, but golly, that's like 80%, 90%. Hell, it's a lot of people, a lot of lost business. And the people of Texas were, I think, were brokenhearted, because I know I was, it was just like, what else can we take here, or, how much more tragedy can we take here? It's like, what is this stuff,
Now, Lance, of course, was tag team partners with the Dingo Warrior, aka the Ultimate Warrior. Any stories about that in the book? There's got to be.
There is. There is, and I'm going to save it for the people online. There's a funny story that they go out of town, and of course Lance meets a woman. That was his MO. That always happened. And him and the Warrior have a conversation about Lance wanting the room, and I'll save that story for the readers. But yeah, there is a story in there, and he liked Jim Hellwig. He liked, the thing I found out about Lance was, if they had muscles like he did, they got along well. One thing, they had something in common, but they could always talk about, they could talk about their working out and stuff like that. And they had, weightlifting ideas or different ways of nutrition and stuff. So he usually got well along with those guys.
Grapple Vision wants to know, did Lance keep any friends from inside the wrestling business after he got out of it?
He did. He stayed in contact with Dusty Wolf, Jeff Bearden. PJ Black. He wrestled for PJ Black's dad in South Africa, so he's talked to PJ Black. PJ Black was a kid, of course, when Lance wrestled over there, but when I say a kid, probably 10 or 11. But they've kept in touch through the years. I spoke to PJ Black a little while last week. I'm working on a story with him. It's been a little while since they've spoke, but yeah, they've kept in touch over the years. I think trying to think who else. Those are the three names that I can think off the top of my head.
Now, you say Lance was honest in his book. Did he talk about steroids?
He did.
That's something that the doctors would have hooked him up with as well?
I think he was introduced to steroids well before wrestling. Got to remember, he was a bodybuilder and a weightlifter. There's an interesting story in the front of the book with his mother. and how he got into working out. He probably had this not had this life-changing event with his mother, maybe he'd never been a wrestler, because maybe he never would have worked out. But Lance was a really, really, really chubby kid, you know, and every time he says it, he couldn't find the picture he wanted to give me, but he was overweight as a child. And so his mom, again, there's some stories in there that some of the things his mom did to him, but he ended up working out. And when he was working out, he started running around with some guys. Back then, you got to remember, in that scene, in the gym scene, you're talking maybe late 70s, early 80s, steroids were very prominent, you know? And so, yeah, he met steroids way before he met wrestling, you know?
Yeah, they still are very prominent.
Well,
Even though, although I think they were legal till like 1990, and then they became illegal in most places. But
right.
as far as someone asked earlier, is there any stories that were left out of the book, didn't quite make the cut, that you could share?
Well, there's one story that Lance has always wanted to know why I never put it in the book. And I can't even remember what country he is in now. I would say somewhere in South Africa. But he was, he just got done wrestling, and he was in his trunks, and he was talking to these girls. And I guess he thought he was, I don't know, maybe going to go out with the girls after the match or something like that. But what happened was, when he went into the changing room to take a shower, he came out and the girls took his clothes, or another wrestler, but he thought that the girls took his clothes and maybe a wrestler had him do it. But so he's naked and had no clothes whatsoever. And he left the arena and drove home naked. And that was one story that didn't make the book. And for whatever reason, he was disappointed because it wasn't in the book.
Sean Wood wants to know any stories about Mickey Grant, the legendary world-class pro wrestling producer.
He's mentioned in the book only because of what he did for World Class, but Lance didn't have much interaction with him.
Billy Jack Haynes, very popular on this channel. Maybe you should try and get a book with him. That would be a hell of a task to get his stories down, because they're so out there, and it's hard to keep them on topic.
That's interesting that you bring him up, because there's a full chapter in this book dedicated to Billy Jack Haynes. And so,
the fans are bringing him up, so that's why I was going to ask about if you could share anything about Lance's relationship with Billy Jack, because they were tag team partners in Portland.
That's right. And the interesting thing, when they were tag team partners, or when they had the belts, they weren't friends. They weren't. They had a falling out, and Don put the belts on them during this falling out. And I think Billy Jack ended up going to like Japan or something, because he went to Japan from time to time up there. There's a story in the book that when Billy Jack Haynes went to Japan and then he came back, and that's when him and Lance had a falling out. But I'll share a story with you that Billy Jack Haynes came to Dallas-Fort Worth right as Lance was coming in. And Lance had a couple matches he wrestled under a mask. And when he wrestled under a mask 2 times in World Class, you got to remember, they haven't exposed him yet. So nobody knows Lance, or if there is a Lance or anything. This is before he goes to Portland. And he's coming back from, I think it was Lubbock, and they're on a plane, him and Billy Jack, and they're talking. And he says, well, there's a good possibility I'm going to Portland. He goes, well, I live in Portland, and I have a house in Portland. And if you go to Portland, because it was looking like that, he says, if you go to Portland, call me, and you can stay with me until you settle in and, find your way around and figure something out, and we'll go from there. And so, sure enough, within a couple of weeks, he went up to Portland. And so Billy Jack Haynes picks him up. He has got his black Corvette, and he drives him. He goes, hey, you know what? We're going to meet the boys. And so he goes to meet the boys. And I'll share this story. I've been kind of, not wanting to tell you how the cow ate the cabbage, but I'll share this story for you. This is Lance's very first night in Portland. So Billy takes him up. He goes, hey, we're going to go see the boys. We'll go to the hotel. It was a travel day. So they're staying in a city, but they weren't wrestling that night. So they go to a hotel. It happens to be a hotel where, you know how some hotels, I guess a motel has like the doors on the outside. Well, this had like the doors on the inside. The way Lance describes it, it wasn't the Hilton, but it wasn't the worst thing he ever stayed at. So, he likes a nice hotel, if you haven't noticed. But he walks in this hallway, and he puts his stuff up or whatever. They go to the room and they take care of all that business. And he puts his stuff in the room, and Billy comes over and said, okay, come on, we're going to go meet the boys. Well, as they're walking down the hall, they can hear a lot of yelling, just like a little commotion, coming from the room. And so, they get inside the room, and there's guys all around, huddled around the bed and cheering something on. Well, when they get closer, one of the wrestlers is having sex with a woman. And they're just like, go, you go for it. Go. Yeah, you're the man. And, like teenagers, And what was so funny about this story was Lance is kind of appalled, and he's looking at this scene, right? And the girl in the scene, or who's having sex on the bed, looks over to Lance and says, hey, look, the new guy is here. And everyone's like, hey, new guy, I'm so-and-so, and I'm so-and-so. And they're like reaching over the bed where this couple is having sex, and they're introducing themselves to each other. And so, Lance stayed in there for a couple minutes, and then he walked outside, and he's thinking to himself, like, what the hell did I get myself into, And Billy Jack Haynes comes out to him and says, hey, man, welcome to wrestling.
Yeah, that reminds me of Tony Atlas saying the first time he met Ric Flair was completely naked, and he walked up to him and shook his hand like it was just an everyday thing. Hi, I'm Ric Flair. Like, you're just supposed to ignore that his dick's flopping around. Grapple Vision wants to know, did Lance ever have any dealings with either of the Fullers?
Not to my knowledge. We never talked about them. We never talked about the Fullers, and so I would have to say no.
Was he ever a heel when he was wrestling in any of the other territories?
He's a babyface his whole entire career.
Is there any favorite match that he had in his career, or matches?
He said he liked the matches when he went over to South Africa, and he started to kind of come into his own. He didn't have to fit this Von Erich model anymore. There was a lot of pressure on him wrestling as a Von Erich, he doesn't, no qualms when it comes to, look, Kevin and Kerry were flat out better wrestlers than me, and because here's the thing. It says in the book too, and you'll see there's a theme. There's a theme with a couple things here. A lot of people come up to him and say, hey, whatever you do, don't outshine the boys. Whatever you do, don't outshine the boys. How is he going to outshine the boys? He's not going to outshine the boys because he wasn't a wrestler. And so there was this pressure on him, you know, and of course he says, you know, he makes no bones about it. He goes, I was not ready. But by the time they sent me to world class, I still wasn't ready. I needed another. He thought he needed another year or so up in Portland before he came down to Dallas. But they kind of rushed him because they needed Von Erichs on the card. They're running like 2 shows a night. You know, you got this show on Monday night, you got this show on Friday night, and then you're going to all these places. You're going to these high schools and these bingo halls, and you're going to these little towns in Texas and all over Texas. And so you're going to these high school gyms and stuff like that, and you're running 2 shows a night. So you needed a Von Erich on the card because that was the draw. All the other guys were good, but they weren't Von Erichs, you know. It was Iceman was cool, and Brody was cool, and the Grappler and Jim Garvin and Chris Adams and all those guys were cool, but the Von Erichs, that was the foundation of that. That was the moneymaker. And that's why they brought in Lance.
Did he have any interaction with Rick Rude in Dallas?
He liked Rick Rude, yeah. Liked him a lot. He liked Rick Rude again because Rick Rude was ripped, right? And so they had that in common. But he liked Percy Pringle too. He thought Percy Pringle was just a really kind soul and a really funny guy. And you know, he said he spent a lot of time talking to Percy Pringle, who ended up becoming Paul Bearer. You know, but he mentions those guys in the book as well. You got to remember when Lance came in. You know, that was the American title match that he had in December of 85 when he came down there. So he came down there October for the Cotton Bowl match, went and finished commitments, came back a little bit here and there, but then, you know, he came down, had a match at Thanksgiving with Killer Tim Brooks. And then Christmas, he's fighting Rick Rude for the American title. Probably lasted about 7 minutes.
Was he ever offered a WWE tryout or anything? I imagine if he had actually bothered to try and apply for WWE, they may have been interested in him.
He talks about how when he was in Portland, Don Owen was like, look, don't go. Ricky was his name. His name was Ricky Vaughn up in. But he was like, Ricky, don't go to Dallas. Don't go to Dallas. Go. You can wrestle here for a couple more years and go straight to the WWF. And he kind of thinks that he should have done that. Hindsight, you know, that's a beautiful thing, right? We can see everything a lot clearer when the problem or the situation isn't staring us in the face. But, you know, he wishes he would have done that. However, when Fritz went on TV, he thought that that's why he did it. He thought, and if you know, I don't know this for a fact, but I kind of felt when I was living up there at the time, I kind of felt like Lance got blackballed. You know, it's like nobody really wanted to use him after that. Ken Mantell used him at the Wild Wild West, but him and Ken Mantell got along, and then he went to Puerto Rico, did a tour over there, and then he was pretty much done here in the United States. But he was in Florida, and he met Eric Bischoff. And he was walking by Universal Studios, and he ran into Eric Bischoff down there, and they were outside of a hotel, and he knew, Lance says he knew they were wrestlers as soon as he saw them because they were just big guys. And Eric Bischoff approached him and said, hey, man, you ever think about wrestling? Have you ever wrestled? And then he told him who he was. And And there's a story about Eddie Mansfield in there too. So he met Eddie Mansfield, and it's an interesting story and an interesting conversation that they had. And but at that time, Lance was pretty much, when he met Eric Bishop, he didn't want to go back into, the grind. He kind of liked wrestling over there in the overseas because he could pick and choose. I mean, he wasn't working every day. He could work 2 times a month if he wanted to.
I'll just say for the record, I only had one brief dealing with Eddie Mansfield, and he was a total scumbag in my dealing with him. So I can understand why most people that deal with him hate him. And he's best known for being the guy in the 2020 expose that they did on him. A couple more questions here. Grapple Vision wants to know if Lance was ever offered a large sum of money to jump to a rival company when he was still getting pushed by the Von Erichs.
No.
I see. Someone's mentioning Eddie exposed business. Well, a lot of people actually exposed the business. I won't put that all on him. So I put the link to the book buy page in the description for people that want to buy it. Maybe you could tell us, you've given us a little taste of Lance's career and why people might be interested in the book if they're wrestling fans. But why don't you tell us what's in the book and why people should buy it?
Sure, absolutely. Well, what I like about the book, and I like it because I lived up there, and so I was always curious. Of years after, I'd see a picture of Lance, and I'd like, well, I heard this or heard that, or what really happened with that, and everybody thinks they know the story. It's in here, and if you want to know, you're gonna, he talks about. I'll just read off the chapters for you if you don't mind. But there's a word in there from Kevin Von Erich. He starts it off, and then a foreword by David Manning, and then a passage by Dusty Wolf. The chapters go in as him being discovered, him meeting Fritz, his wrestling training, him going to Portland. There's a chapter on Billy Jack Haynes. There's a chapter on Steve Simpson. A lot of people, you'll know that, Lance was responsible for bringing Steve Simpson down to world class. The landscape started changing a little bit there. And then there's some road stories in there from Portland, which is pretty interesting. You got him coming down to Dallas, wrestling as Lance. There's a chapter on Ric Flair. There's a chapter on Gino Hernandez. He shares the perspective of what was going on around when Gino died, and his interactions with Gino, and he liked Gino. He liked him a lot. There's a chapter on them wrestling in Israel. Very fascinating. They had culture issues. Of course, they go over there during Passover, and so they can't eat what they want to eat. There's a story in there of Kerry Von Erich and some of the other wrestlers hijacking the kitchen of the hotel, and they pretty much eat what they want in there. And you've got a chapter on Chris Adams, Kerry Von Erich, Mike Von Erich, them going to South Africa. Lance was on a train that was bombed, and there was a religious group that tried to pull a fatwa on them where they were going to kidnap them and kill them to make an example out of the wrestlers. And the country of India was protecting them. And in the end, the train ended up getting bombed. But that wasn't the only thing that happened that day. So a lot of people died, but the wrestlers got lucky. That story's in the book. Kamala was on that train. Jeff Bearden was on that train. Dusty Wolf was on that train. Barbarian was on that train. So it's a really good, very interesting story. Mark Laurinaitis was on there as well. And It goes into some of Lance's extracurricular activities. How he made money. I just saw that the question about Kerry, and will you read the question to me, because there's a really good story about that.
The person just says that Kerry played off not having a foot pretty well, which that is true. Not many people knew at the time.
That's true. And David Manning, when they down there on the end of Lance's run, I guess, or after, I guess, before Kerry went up to WWF, or there was a couple times that when they'd go to like some beach areas like St. Thomas or wherever, Virgin Islands or wherever it was, David said that he didn't always want to wear like long pants on the beach or something, and he thinks that it got out a little bit like that, like rumors started coming out a little bit. But yes, they did a really good job of keeping that. And the stories in the book that there was, the people that were operating that day basically had to take an oath that that they couldn't say anything at all, that nothing was to leave that room that day when the amputation occurred. And that story came from David Manning, and it's in the book. Now, I thought it was weird when Kerry went up to WWF and they put those tassels on his boots. That was the first thing that just struck me. And I never thought that he had an amputation. I just thought that, maybe he got messed up pretty good in the motorcycle accident. We knew it was bad. I mean, he didn't wrestle for almost 2 years. So he didn't move the same, but the tassels to me were like a distraction. So, I never thought that he was missing a foot. And yeah, I was shocked that, he did. He played it off great.
Well, I appreciate you going through the stories of the book with us. I still have to finish it, but I'm looking forward to going through it, especially now that you've given us the teaser. Grapple Vision says Kerry is his legit favorite wrestler. He's up there for sure.
I loved Kerry too, man, and I'll never forget that day he won the title over there at Texas Stadium. That was awesome. And
were you there for that?
I was there for that.
Oh wow!
And it was hot. It was 114, and we were sitting on the side where the sun was hitting us. Wow! And my dad didn't take me to a wrestling match outside after that ever again.
Well, that was probably the biggest Texas wrestling event of all time.
It was awesome, man. It was a good day. And there was one chapter that I didn't mention right after the train bombing. There's one called Wrestlers, Guns, and Money. Oh. And I'll say this. Lance came up with some ways to make some money over there in South Africa. It's probably couldn't have gotten away with a lot of stuff he did over here, but he'll tell you, and it's in the book. He went and made phone calls and he said, "Hey, I'm going to do this." And he called airlines and said, "Hey, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. How do I do this? And, how do I pack these guns and whatnot?" But it'll be a very interesting read when you get into the details of that book and what some of the people did over there. And I'll say this real quick, Devin. I do have signed copies by Lance. The book is not actually signed. He did sign labels and he sent me the labels. And he's living in another country. But Lance is not coming to the States, and he's not coming to conventions. And if you do have a wrestling autograph collection and you want a rare autograph, I can send you for $24.95. I can send you a signed book by Lance. And I've gotten so many phone calls of people like, look, we want him at this convention. We want him at that convention. Everyone has this idea. And now that he has a book, he's going to go on this tour. You know what? Had I not approached Lance, we probably wouldn't have been doing this book. He probably wouldn't have done a book. He's so far removed from wrestling that, when I first approached him about this book, he was like, why do you want to do this? And I said, well, I just want to write a story. I just wanted to write a story for my website. And he was like, who cares? And he goes, tell me, who is the one person who's going to care about this, Vinny? And I was like, me. I care. And so he did the story with me. But after he read the story, he liked it so much. I said, look, there was so much stuff I couldn't put in the story. I said, if you ever want to write a book, please consider me for the book. I would love to do it. And I never wrote a book before. This was my first project like this, my first undertaking. And he said, Vinny, write the book. And there you go.
Very interesting. Well, I'm in the process of doing my own book right now as well, with somebody helping me out. So I look forward to finishing your book. I'll let you close this off however you want. Thank you again for the copy you sent me. And I'm sure one of these days when I'm back down in Texas, which at the latest will be later this year, I'll run into you.
Yeah, that would be nice. I'll send you my number, and next time you're in Texas, you can hit me up. And this summer I've been hitting some shows and getting out. I haven't done anything since the book came out because of COVID. But I've hit some shows, and I'm meeting a lot of people, and the book is getting a response. I also have a new book coming out. It's coming out in July, and it is called Russellville, the Gulf Coast region, and more. And it consists of 35 short stories and of various wrestlers. And it also has over 300 pictures of the Gulf Coast region, spanning from 2011 to 2021. I think we got some matches up to the first of the year. So there's the book right there. And there's a story in there: Harley Race, Tracy Smothers, Ricky Morton, Bushwhacker, all the guys on the cover, plus 25 more, and so I think fans would like that. The reason why I like that book and why I wanted to do that book was that I do have a hard time committing to a book. And if the book doesn't grab me, sometimes I can't finish it, and I wanted to do a book of short stories for such a long time. And so I put my short stories of the wrestlers together in this book. And the beauty of this thing is you can read one story or two stories. You can read a couple stories before you go to bed, put it down. You don't have to, pressure yourself. You can pick it up. You look at the pictures. You can come back to it. It's a fun read. And even in the back of the book, Jean-Paul LeBlanc, he was the one who helped me with the book, and he gave me access to all those pictures. And we put some promo pictures. So if you have the book at the show, you can get these people. There's 24 like promo pics in the back, and you can get them autographed, and so it's loaded down with pictures. It's loaded down with interesting stories. And it's the second book coming out behind Lance Von Erich. And I think it's a good compliment. It is totally different than an autobiography, but I think fans are really going to enjoy it. And my friends who have read it, like the fact that, they didn't have to commit to the whole thing to enjoy it, but one of my friends, he read the whole thing. He was pretty impressed with it. So I think fans are going to like it. And it's already selling. It's coming out in July. I do not have it on the website right now, but I've been selling pre-orders at the live shows that I've been going to, and people are already buying it. So it's pretty surprising that, that it's not out yet, and people are very interested in it. I got a prototype printed up, and so people get to look at it at the shows, and it's pretty neat.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it.